Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Your organisation runs training courses for your staff and customers. Only problem is, it's time-consuming, inconvenient and costly. Take a leaf out of our book. The School of Hard Knock Knocks uses the online training platform by YZ, and our team and customers love it. It's simple to use, supports every media format, audio, video, text, and looks great on desktops, tablets and mobiles. And for a limited time, quote SHKK when you arrange a demo and get 10% off your first year's plan. YZ helps us deliver comedy courses around the world. Imagine what it could do for your organisation. YZ, that's WYZED.com. YZ, online learning made simple.
You're listening to the School of Hard Knock Knocks podcast with me, Steve Davis.
Ladies and gentlemen, your next comedian.
Shouldn't drink on an empty head, you know that, don't you?
That is the shittiest heckle I have ever heard in my life.
Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it.
What's a bucket list?
You have dangerously underprepared yourself for the shit that is about to get real.
When you've got someone laughing, you've got them agreeing with you, whether they know it or not. So says Scott Dikkers, founder of The Onion, quite possibly the world's most famous satirical publication. In this School of Hard Knock Knocks podcast, host Steve Davis chats with Scott Dikkers about the serendipity of cheap paper, comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comfortable, taboos and accepting criticism, all while being a benevolent dictator. Scott also talks about his new book, How to Write Funny. If you love writing satire, enjoy reading satire, or have ever laughed, then you'll enjoy this interview with Scott Dikkers.
And suddenly my world changed. I didn't know you could make fun of everything. This was a revelation. So I started to see life through a lens of humor. And so life became fun. Life was worth living all of a sudden. Humor saved me. So I've made it my calling to create laughs for myself and other people. It's a science for me. I'm like a Peter McGraw. I analyzed humor and tried to figure out what would make it the funniest. And as owner and editor of The Onion over the years, I developed a system for creating consistently funny humor that my very talented team of writers and I worked every week, week after week, for years to try to improve and to try to perfect. And we're always going for that holy grail of like the best joke about any given subject. And we got pretty good at it. I would get letters. This is the funniest writing I've ever seen, and I'm in my 90s. I was on antidepressants, and I've been reading your publication laughing so hard, I feel so much better now. My doctor has taken me off the meds. I was suicidal. I found no joy, but The Onion has made me laugh so hard, I want to keep reading it, and I want to live. I believe in the power of humor to make our lives better, so I want there to be more of it. So it's my mission in life to pass on now what I've learned in my years crafting jokes that have the highest possible potential for laughs.
Scott Dikkers, welcome to the School of Hard Knock Knocks podcast.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Steve. Happy to be here.
And I tell you, it must be the pleasure of most people listening in, because The Onion is known by many of us providing chuckles, chortles, some things to ponder. And I'd like to take back to the beginning. You're one of the founders of The Onion, which I believe was in the early 90s, late 80s, and around 96 went online, having been a print publication. When did you first realize, oh my God, we have gone international, everyone knows us?
Yeah, so it wasn't exactly when we went online, though technically at that point, the whole world could now see what we were doing, whereas before that, we were just a print newspaper distributed in Madison, Wisconsin, and a couple of other cities like in the Midwest of the United States. So that was pretty big for us. But at that time, anyone who's old enough to remember, the internet was a very strange thing that not a lot of people used. A lot of people used email, but there were a few like websites that people used for like research or like MySpace type stuff, like social gathering or whatever. And there wasn't a lot of entertainment. There was some news online. There were news stations were online. So when we put our website online, we were already producing this weekly newspaper, and we figured, I mean, I think it was one of our designers came up to us because he like knew about computers, and he said, hey, there's this thing called the internet. You should put up a web page. And we were like, okay, we'll just put the stuff we wrote for the newspaper on the computer, and then other people can see it. And we figured it'd just be a bunch of nerds, from who use computers who would see it. But it was pretty quickly thereafter that we realized there really was no other entertainment. Like maybe Disney had a website, but there was no like comedy humor, like specifically comedy entertainment online. And so people discovered it and talked about it, and it spread really fast. And we got written up in the New Yorker magazine. They did a little review, and it was a glowing review. And that was pretty mind-blowing. Like we had been trying so hard up to that point to get anyone to notice us, like distributing The Onion on the street, in campuses. We sent it to famous comedians in Hollywood, hoping that they would show their friends. We're just doing anything we could. And just putting it on the computer on this weird thing called the World Wide Web is what opened us up. And we had been growing, like the print publication had been growing steadily up to that point, but it was still very small potatoes. It was probably no bigger than a small city weekly newspaper in terms of its circulation. And then once we're online, it's like, 1 billion people had access to it at least.
So it's not like you were plucked out of obscurity by some bit of luck. You guys were working really hard to get known, and that New Yorker piece would have been the fruit of all that heavy lifting you've been doing for many years.
Yeah, it's funny because we were trying. We did the print newspaper. We did a radio news show for local radio that we syndicated to other radio stations. We tried to make a TV pilot. We were just trying anything we could to get the word out. And I didn't even consider the computer to be like a medium at that point. I didn't know it was going to be another vertical or whatever. But the funny thing is, like after that happened, it was such a thrill to be written up glowingly in the New Yorker. But the growth happened so fast that inside of a year, I was starting to get annoyed by how much press coverage we were getting. Like every day, a new TV station or publication wanted to come to our office and hang out with our writers and find out what's the secret sauce behind this new humor thing. And I was like, leave us alone. We're just trying to work at this point. So it happened really fast. That
is the sort of problem many people listening would wish they had.
Yeah, no, obviously it was the problem we always wanted.
Yes. Now, tell me, just from a scale perspective, what were the numbers of people involved when you started versus when you hit this inflection point and had the meteoric growth?
Yeah, so it was like 3 or 4 people in the beginning. These 2 business guys who started it, and they brought me in as sort of the talent because I was a cartoonist in town who had a popular comic strip. And so they brought me on for like the credibility that I brought. And there were a few freelancers who did photos and other writing and stuff. And for the first year or 2, it was very much like a 3-tiered organization. There was the creative part of the organization, which was me and any writers or photographers that I would find and sort of use as freelancers. Then there was the business side where they sold the advertising and tried to pay the bills. And then the third side was like the technical or the computer side of it, where they had the Macintosh computer that they laid out the paper in, and they took it to the copy store and printed it out. And then we took those printouts to the printer to print the newspaper. And they were all pretty siloed, so I was just kind of alone in my little bubble, and I could write whatever I wanted, could print whatever I wanted. We had a deal where the business guy, my partner, couldn't tell me what I could write. And that's great. Most magazines don't have that. Most magazines, the business people have veto power over the talent, over the creatives, or at least the legal department does. But that was our deal. I couldn't tell him how to spend the money. He couldn't tell me what to write. And it was a beautiful deal that lasted for almost 20 years. And over time, we grew this writing staff kind of like you would grow a band, like you'd notice somebody funny around town in Madison and you'd say, hey, you should come write for us at The Onion. And this little band of misfits kind of got together and formed this cohesive group and developed this voice, this fake news voice, which took a long time. At first, The Onion was doing kind of weekly, zany tabloid parody stuff. It would do wacky college contests, stuff like this. And it took us a while to realize, it's funniest when we pretend we're a real newspaper and we play it really straight. And everybody kind of learned that voice, and stories were very much written by committee or in a group to make sure everybody's best jokes ended up in the story, and the editor would kind of smooth it all out, make it make sense. And so the staff was small up until the point that I described earlier where we kind of got known. It was maybe a 10-person writing staff.
Wow.
And then over the few years after that, it would grow. When we started doing video, we brought in a whole new team for that. And then we started expanding to having a wider freelancer pool, to the point when I left a couple of years ago, it was like a core staff of about 12 full-time writers, and then a wider staff of about 50 contributors. And then outside of that, like maybe 100 freelance, like joke writers and such.
The way you describe that, writing joke by committee, is a little bit counterintuitive. But when you think about it, I've read stories about Saturday Night Live, and there's a similar sort of thing, making sure that the best material gets included. Does that bring frustration for some comedy writers?
Yeah, and I use committee as shorthand. Really what it is it's a benevolent dictatorship. And that's the best that's the best way to run a writer's room, because you have to have an editor in charge who is the sort of steward of the vision. And everybody else contributes jokes, but the editor decides which jokes are good and which jokes go in. And at The Onion, I always was very careful about making sure that names were never attached to jokes, so that you never knew who came up with it. That way, you're judging it on its merits. You're not judging it based on, I like that person, I'm sure their joke is funny, because that's how most writers' rooms function. People are sort of trained to laugh at the boss's jokes, and I never wanted that to happen. I don't care if the janitor writes the headline that week, as long as it's the funniest headline, and that's what we're going to use. So benevolent dictatorship is how I would say it. But still, people get upset, if they write a story and the editor changes it too much, they get upset.
Just like a real newspaper.
Just like in a real newspaper, yeah.
I want to come back to fake news, because in many ways the world is mirroring the legacy of The Onion, but in another way, you foretold what was going to happen in our part of the world, because we have a former Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, who is known for eating raw onions, and I believe there was raw onion munching taking place back in the early days, perhaps when The Onion, I think the original name was The Rag. Can you tell us more about that? Oh, yeah.
That's true. It was The Rag, and it was going to be, I thought it was going to be a comedy news, like a magazine on newsstands, because that's how comedy was always delivered, was in the form of a magazine. But when we took that idea of a magazine to the printer, they told us how much it would cost to print that every week, and it was just impossible. We didn't have any money. The idea that we would print this glossy, full-color magazine was absurd. So we asked them, okay, what's the cheapest kind of paper we could possibly print on? And they said, well, you could print on newsprint. That's by far the cheapest. Mm-hmm. And I was like, my heart sank, because I wanted The Onion to look good, and newsprint that was a terrible idea. I'd never heard of a humor newspaper before. But it was all we could afford, so that's what we did. And the name The Onion stuck because it's kind of like a great name for a newspaper, because you peel back the layers to get at the facts, And the reason that name was in the air was because one of those two guys I mentioned who started it, who brought me in as the talent, he used to eat raw onion on a piece of untoasted white bread for breakfast.
Oh.
And so there was this whiff of onions in the office, and somebody was in there one time and suggested, hey, we should call it The Onion. And it just stuck.
The drive to keep producing this material week in, week out, now it's day in, day out with the people who are still carrying on.
Yeah, it's madness.
Yeah. Is there some higher purpose behind that madness? Is there something about satire that there's an inkling of trying to achieve change or get us to pause for thought? Or am I reading too many layers deep into this onion?
No, you're absolutely not. People who do this type of work do it because they feel as though they have to. They have to communicate their ideas. And, we all have things to say. We satirists, we have problems with the world, with humanity that we want to express, and we do it through humor. We don't want to preach. We just want to make jokes, but we want the subtle subtext of the joke to make a little connection in the reader's brain and make them see the world like we see it. We want them to see the absurdity of it in the hopes that maybe someday somebody will have the courage to change it, because we don't have the courage to change it. We just are going to write about it and make fun of it.
And then, of course, was it Shakespeare said, many a true word spoken in jest. So, and
sure,
I think Oscar Wilde also made a quip about if you use humour, you can get truth delivered in a way that otherwise they'd kill you. So,
because when you've got somebody laughing, you've got them agreeing with you whether they know it or not.
But choosing the themes, there's an Australian satirist, Jonathan Biggins, who actually just has a show coming out all about Paul Keating, a former Prime Minister of Australia who had a razor-sharp wit. He has done a lot of review theatre around Australia in the vein of satire, and he said federal topics work better than state topics. There seems to be something about your topic for satire needs to be so universally known and understood so that people can engage with it. Have you found that to be the case, or is there a chance where some more niche topics can still grab our attention?
No, he's right for the most part. I always think back to Monty Python's Flying Circus, who made fun of a lot of British politicians in the late 60s, early 70s. And when I watched that show, when it came to America in the early 80s, I didn't know who any of those people were. And it worked anyway because they made them universal. They made the ideas behind the jokes something that would apply to any authority figure, any leader. And one of the most important missions of satire is to bring down authority. Like, everybody loves that. We love to poke fun at authority figures. So we learned early at The Onion that you couldn't make local jokes. You couldn't make jokes about the chancellor of the University of Wisconsin. You might get some laughs on campus because people know who that is, but as soon as you send it away to somebody in Hollywood or whatever, they're like, who's that? I don't get it, or whatever, unless you can make it universal. So you have to see those people as merely vessels for a deeper point about authority, about, like, if you do want to go local instead of federal, you just have to make those local officials into funny character archetypes that everyone can relate to, then it works. But we immediately started making fun of national politics and world politics just to make the work more accessible, because ultimately that's the most important thing. Prose writing is one of the hardest mediums to actually reach people with, because it's like work to them. It's like homework for them to try to actually read something. People want to watch a video, or they want to be entertained on stage. They don't want to sit and read something. So you have to work really hard to make your writing compelling. And one of the ways we did that was make it accessible. And another way we did it was having these big funny headlines that draw you in. If you're laughing at the headline, maybe you're going to read the next few lines, and we can rope you into actually reading our work. So some of it is like just practical, functional stuff like that, but it does serve like the grander purpose. And you've definitely hit that on the head.
So while I still have the DNA of your satire stretched out here on my lab bench, there's one continuum there of the universally understood to the local and niche. I wonder if there's another continuum between punching up at big authority figures versus punching down on easier targets. We almost had that as another axis. Do you think there's a relevance there in what makes some satire higher and better value than others?
Absolutely. So we all know that truism about comedy. The way I like to think of it is you need to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. So it's not just about punching up instead of down. It's also about lifting up and not lifting down, you know?
Wow.
So if you aggrandize authority figures, that's not funny. If you laud our leaders as geniuses, that's not funny. You need to call them idiots, and you need to tear them down and poke holes in their authority. People love that. By the same token, you can't mock disenfranchised people. You can't kick people while they're down. Nobody finds that funny. You have to lift those people up and show them as being just as human as the best among us. It's like the least of thy brethren have to be loved. So that's how I see it. And there are times where the line is a little blurred, like we might do a piece in The Onion that will make fun of a local principal at a school or something. Now, that may seem like a lot of people to be punching down, but to us, that's punching up because he's a principal. He's an authority figure at a school, and you can make fun of him all day.
Yeah.
So it's all depends on the context. But because sometimes I think picking on the wrong target and doing it mercilessly can be really funny. But you could never do it on someone who's completely disenfranchised. That just would never work.
And that brings, of course, politicians and politics right into the firing line. And I noticed that your former colleagues who are still going strong with The Topical, one of their podcasts. I noticed a couple of recent headlines. One was, is Bernie Sanders too old to be the next James Bond? And there's a great one I've been listening to recently, Republicans calling out the Democrats' search for a candidate as a witch hunt to oust Donald Trump. And there's just biting satire. Can you just chart some thoughts about getting involved in politics with your satire over the time from when America was a little more cohesive than it seems to be now, where it's very partisan and very polarized? Has anything changed in the way comedians and satirists should or could be approaching politics as a topic in 2020?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it always humbles me how people from other countries know so much about what's going on in America, and we know zilch about what's going on in other countries.
Well, you are you are our overlords. So,
we're the cultural overlords, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like there has been a bit of a change. When The Onion started, you could be an equal opportunity offender, and you could find stupidity anywhere. And I feel like The Onion still does that. It's going to make fun of the left. It's going to make fun of the right. There was a really funny piece the other day about how the Democrats decided that they needed someone more conservative to defeat Trump, so they were recruiting Trump to run as a Democrat to defeat Trump. But then on the same day, they'll make fun of Trump for being an idiot. So you've got it on both sides. But the difference now is that so many people are on a hair trigger to complain about you being partisan, that they never see the broader point that you're just making fun of the stupidity of humanity 99% of the time. You're not trying to make a political point. Anytime you start to make a political point, you've lost people. So The Onion has always been very careful about that. Making sure, like Joe Biden, for example, we made Joe Biden into this funny character for many years where he was like this Rust Belt dirtbag who would brag about his sexual exploits and wash his Trans Am with no shirt on in front of the White House and stuff. But then as soon as he became a serious contender for the nomination, and now it looks like he's the front runner who's probably going to get the nomination, The Onion, is turning on him and going savage and making fun of him for losing his mind and his conservative politics and you name it. So before he was just a harmless comical sort of figure.
Yeah. So if there's a comedian listening now who's writing political satire or political comedy, how much should we listen to those people with a hair trigger ready to complain about being partisan? Should we put wax in our ears and not listen, or is there something valuable from taking the temperature, the reading of the room or the marketplace?
I think you can always learn a thing or two from listening to any criticism, as long as you have the stomach for it. But I also feel like if you're getting too much, if you're getting more criticism than compliments, that's a problem. Typically, in this day and age, it's such a glutted marketplace for comedy and entertainment, since basically everybody has access to perform or write online. You're probably not even getting noticed. And if you're getting noticed enough to actually get negative feedback, you're probably doing something right. You probably have a lot of fans. My theory is that for every 50 fans, you get one hater. So if you've got a hater, congratulations, you probably have 50 fans. And that's a good thing.
I like the idea of pointing out the stupidity of humanity. Just to harken back to one of the current stories that The Topical is running, there was a story about federal transport figures showing that a huge number of road accidents on our highways are going unvideoed, and how we can change that. And it really gets right into texting while driving without saying that out loud. It is stupidity on our part, and it's just peeled back. So, yeah, that sort of comedy. It's great, isn't it?
Yeah, those are the best jokes, when there's clearly no partisan bent. It's just pointing out how stupid people are, and that we can all laugh at our own foibles, and we can see ourselves in that. And when you can indict the reader for being part of the problem and laughing at themselves, that's the best. That's kind of the holy grail. I saw a headline, speaking of current issues, in a real newspaper recently that I thought, now that would have made a good Onion headline. And it was, "Coronavirus conference canceled due to coronavirus."
Yes.
This is real.
It writes itself.
It writes itself.
So on that note, you mentioned Holy Grail. Were there any moments, stellar stories that you still remember that you're most proud of from your career with The Onion?
Oh, quite a few. So my favorite stories are the ones that when we wrote them, we thought they were just crazy, silly, over the top, hyperbolic craziness. But then they came true later. So one of my favorites was an editorial that we printed, written by the CEO of the Gillette Razor Company.
Yes.
And the headline was, "Fuck it, we're doing 5 blades." And at the time, it was outrageous and funny, and the story was so funny. It was written by Joe Garden, and the guy was just such a wonderful character. He was just way overconfident and just a real badass. And then a few months later, Gillette literally introduced a 5-bladed razor, which to us seemed absurd. But so things like that, when those sorts of things happen, that's just, nothing makes me happier. We used to have a wall of fame at The Onion where we would tack up the Onion story, and then next to it we'd tack up the story from the real news that would happen later because we predicted it.
Wow. That's great and sad all at once.
Yeah. Yes.
There is a lot of parody and satire news sites now. I think you've spawned many of them.
What have we done?
Yeah, and I know, and I'm finding I get fatigued by, yes, here we go, another, supposedly funny twist, and not everyone is nailing that particular genre of comedy. And plus, Trump's made it clear, everything's fake news, and we have got a real shallow level of journalism worldwide at the moment, sadly. So do you despair where we're at and in some ways regret that you really showed where we were heading?
I do. Like, I'm getting old enough now where I'm getting into Mark Twain and George Carlin territory, where I just feel like, to hell with these damned humans.
Yeah.
They're just so stupid and they can't do anything right. And you get to this place where you're just so bitter and cynical, and you've been spending your whole life pointing out how stupid people are, and they won't change. Like, why won't they get smarter? So, yeah, I do have that problem, and I see so much bias and laziness in the so-called real media that it saddens me that I've spent my whole career trying to point out the main subtext of The Onion. If I had to pick one subtextual message that we're trying to communicate, it's, hey, don't believe everything you read.
Yeah.
That problem is so much worse now than it was when we started.
Indeed, we've got a national TV show that analyses the media. It's called Media Watch, and they pointed out last week of all the major stations running a satirical news story as real news, which is not uncommon.
Yeah. No, that happens to The Onion all the time. We have a show here called On the Media, which does a very similar thing, just pointing out the media's problems and mistakes, and there are plenty to talk every week. They have a full show every week, plenty to talk about.
Sadly, yes. Look, are there topics that are off limits, do you think?
I don't think there's any topic that's off limits. What's off limits is, are you comforting the comfortable or are you afflicting the afflicted? Once you do that, you're sort of culturally, socially in unacceptable territory. Because nobody's going to laugh at it, and they're actually going to revile you for doing it.
How do you make something you've written funnier? Is there a protocol or a process that you would suggest is a good way to review your material?
Funny enough, there is. So I actually developed a really strong system for that at The Onion, because we were on a treadmill. For years we had to put out a certain amount of humor writing every week. And so we developed a really strict system for making sure that what we were putting out was the funniest we could possibly put out every week. And so when I left The Onion, I wrote it all down, kind of wrote out the process in a book, and I called it How to Write Funny, and I published it on Amazon, just self-published it with no fanfare whatsoever. And it started selling and selling more and more and more, and now like it's become a number one bestseller on Amazon. The sequel was a number one new release, and I started teaching people this system, how to write comedy, at the Second City in Chicago, the famed comedy school, and now I'm doing it online at howtowritefunny.com. And it's very simple. It's basically, you come up with what you want to say, because every writer, every comedian should have a message that they want to communicate. Otherwise, why are they talking? And that message usually isn't funny. It's usually just an idea, a value judgment, an opinion. And then you have to filter that opinion through one of 11 different literary devices, which I call funny filters, one or more of these 11, and it comes out the other end as a really funny joke. So among those 11 are things like irony, analogy, misplaced focus, hyperbole, shock, madcap, meta humor, and there's only 11. So there's a lot of different ways that people try to make things funny that don't fit within those 11. It's not going to work as a professional quality joke. Only those 11 funny filters are going to make something feel like a professionally crafted joke. And that's the basic system right there. There's more to it, obviously, but that's the basics.
Yeah, but some great reading by the sounds of How to Write Funny. You're still running a podcast called How to Write Funny as well?
Yeah, I interview professional comedians and comedy writers, producers, people in the business, talk about how they do what they do. That's a lot of fun for me, yeah.
One of your writers was called Carol, and she could be very famous in Australia currently, because I heard she's developed a way of getting free toilet paper, because we're having a toilet paper crisis. Can you elaborate on Carol?
Yeah, so before I hired Carol, I discovered her around town in Madison doing these little stunts around town, like these comedy stunts. And she wasn't trying to get a job doing comedy or anything. She was just a funny person doing these funny things. And one of the things she did was collected toilet paper when she went on vacation. She would steal a roll of toilet paper from the public restroom at whatever tourist trap she was vacationing at. And then she would label where it came from and she would display it in her house. And somehow she got listed on the National Museum Registry, and people would send her toilet paper when they went on vacation.
Oh, wow.
And they would label it. And so in short order, her entire apartment, all the walls were lined with toilet paper from all over the world. And she called it the Madison Museum of Bathroom Tissue. And she would give you a tour. She had toilet paper from the Great Wall of China. She had the Louvre. She had the Smithsonian. She had the White House. Toilet paper from the White House, which was encased in a special glass box, so you couldn't defile it. And it was just so wonderful. And so we hired her, and she worked for us for many years. And now she writes on sitcoms. She's a writer on Brooklyn Nine-Nine, for example. She's had a very prolific career.
So there is money in comedy.
You can certainly make money doing comedy. There are a number of different ways to do it. And, I made money before The Onion ever started. I was making money as a full-time cartoonist, and I was very happy doing that. I was excited when The Onion came along, and I jumped at the chance. And then I started doing voice work for commercials and cartoons and video games, which was a whole different area of comedy that a lot of people make a lot of money at. And I kind of had a second income doing that. And then I did a number of different podcasts and books over the years that were separate from The Onion. And I do comedy lecturing, another way to make money. There's so many different ways to do it. But the core thing, and the people who do the best, are the people who don't care if they make money. It's the people who are doing it because they love it, and they just happen to have leveraged it in a way that makes them money. So I actually encounter people now who want to get into comedy because they think it's a great way to make money, not because they actually enjoy it or have a need to do it. And those people are signing up for an awful, awful ride, because it's a lot of hard work being in writers' rooms and working on TV shows, if that's the route you take. Like, it's just a lot of hours, and it's a lot of hard work, and it's very dispiriting because so much of your work gets rejected in comedy. 99% of everything you write is garbage, and a lot of people can't handle that. So it's the people who do comedy for fun, and they do it because they love it, and they do it for free, who ultimately get plucked. Like somebody like Carol Kolb, she wasn't getting paid to do the Toilet Paper Museum. She was doing it because it was fun, and she enjoyed it. She had some kind of bizarre need to do it. That's the sort of person who's going to get plucked for a job and is going to do great in that job because she's doing what she loves,
Beautiful. There are going to be some people who want to hear more from you, and you are a keynote speaker. If someone wants to book you post-coronavirus, I imagine, how do they book you to come and be a speaker?
Well, they can get in touch with me. I'm online. I have a website. It's scottdikkers.com. Contact me there. I'm on Twitter at Scott Dikkers. I'm on Instagram. And I can, if anybody wants to talk to me, they can reach me there, and I can put them in touch with my agents if it's like an event they want to book me for. So, and gigs are getting canceled because of the coronavirus. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah. Oh, look, thanks so much for taking some time out to chat about this. I really could linger here, but I think buying a copy of How to Write Funny sounds like a good move for anyone who's listening to this as well. I'll be doing it. So, Scott, thanks very much for what you've done, for charting such a great course in giving us a bright legacy of satire, which the world needs so that we can keep our eyes open more clearly. Thanks, Scott.
Oh, thank you, Steve. That's very kind of you to say. It's been my pleasure speaking with you.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.